All right, y'all, listen, I want us to just chat this morning, all right? And we're going to use Jeremiah chapter 1. So if you have your Bibles with you, go ahead and open up to Jeremiah chapter 1 as we talk through some stuff. And I want to use Jeremiah chapter. We're going to talk about some history, and we're going to look at Jeremiah, and we're going to do all of that, and it's going to seem like, what is all this? But just kind of hang with me here. We'll get to it in due time. I want to talk about that because of where we are on our calendar. We are right here, the very first Sunday, as Ted already pointed out for us, very first Sunday of a brand new year. The past is the past. 2012 is behind us. All the hubbub of November, December, that's all behind us. And we are standing at a place where a whole new year awaits us. And I mean, it's fun to anticipate, to think about what God may be bringing about. And even though we have baggage that we carry, some things that we're going to have to still continue to deal with and all that sort of thing, this new year, we know there's some new adventures coming down the pike if we have our eyes open. If we can see them. Now, some things will jump up and grab you no matter what. That's a lot of times those are not the things that are not all that pleasant, right? But if we can be aware, if we just let ourselves spiritually see the landscape around us, why this experience can be so much richer and we won't miss much. Let me tell you what, how much do we miss because we're not paying attention? How much do we miss because we don't have our eyes open? We're not really looking to see what's coming down the pike. How much do we miss in terms of challenges, in terms of opportunities, in terms of our relationships? What gets by us because we're not looking? So here's my question to you this morning. Are you tuned in? Are you paying attention to what's going on around us? And listen, a lot of it depends upon your perspective. The spiritual perspective we have about life and about what's this whole enterprise of human existence here on this planet. Things are determined by perspective. It's amazing to me how sometimes different folks can look at the same thing and not even see the same thing. Take a look at your screen just for a moment. You've probably seen this before. And I'm going to look for a show of hands. How many of you saw, first of all, a young woman with her head slightly turned away? Let me see your hands. Okay. How many of you saw, first of all, an old hag? Okay. Can you see both? How many of you can see both? Yeah, okay. All right, right. Okay. Now, isn't that, that's sort of a thing that's kind of been around for a while, but it just it illustrates the fact that you can see the same thing and not see the same thing. I'm asking you to take a look into the future. What do you see? What a question it is. In fact, take a look at this one. Here's the next one. How many of you have ever seen this before? I'm not looking for a show of hands here, but I'm wondering how many people saw Jesus first off. Right? Oh, I said not a show of hands. And you're going to stick them up anyway. There's a deacon's wife over there just messing things up all over the place. Yeah. That's okay. It's okay. And how many of you saw, first of all, really didn't see the name Jesus. You just saw lions and stuff up there. Yeah, okay, we'll raise them. All right, so there you are. There you are. And this one is kind of metaphorical for us, really. Because you know, and I know, down in our soul, down in our gut, we know who's got the future, right? Jesus has it. It's all in God's hands. I don't think there's anybody in here, in this room, that would doubt that. We got some questions about how God acts sometimes and what God does in our lives and in our own personal stories, but we know that He holds that future. Are we seeing that? Are we in tune with that? A very, very important question. What do you see? What do you see? It's an important question because until we answer that and come to grips with that, we're probably not going to be able to take advantage of those challenges and opportunities that God has before us as individuals and as a church as well. Huh? What do you see? Now that's a question that God asks all over Scripture. Here's my feeling about it. I think that God's asking me that question every day. And to be honest with you, I think He's asking you as well. But you're probably like me, and I'm not always paying attention. I get caught up in the stuff of life and the routine and whatever it is that may be going on and stuff like that, and I don't always hear the question. I don't always hear God asking that, but I believe He asks that every day. What do you see today, Mark? What's on the, are you tuned in? What do you see today? I think He's asking that question every day. And you have in Jeremiah chapter 1 where He literally asked that question to one guy twice on the same day. At least that's the way it's written. That's the way it's constructed. It looks like he's being asked that question twice in the very same day. He's asking a guy named Jeremiah to look in the future, and he's asking him, what do you see? And that's kind of what we're doing here today. First Sunday in 2013. What do you see? Very important question, all right? So I want us to think about that. Now, Jeremiah chapter 1, if you got that chapter open. Jeremiah is a very distinguished major prophet in the Jewish economy of things. He was a major prophet, well thought of, highly respected. He's also known as the weeping prophet. Does anybody know why he's called the weeping prophet? Because he cried a lot, right? Okay, but thank you, Gary. I appreciate that very much. But he's also, because he's attributed to have written the book of Lamentations. That's the book that comes right after Jeremiah. And a lamentation is a funeral dirge. And he's actually singing a funeral song over the destruction of Jerusalem by the Babylonian Empire. They were invaded 3 times. The first time is 606, and that's when he wrote the book of Lamentations. The last time was 586 BC. 3 times they were swept in there, all because God was expressing his judgment on people, his people that should have known better, turning away from God. You've turned away from me, and so there's consequences to that. If you're not going to let me care for you, let me tell you, just take a look at what you're going to be facing. And so Jeremiah preached for 40 years, by the way. He preached for 40 years, more or less, without one single solitary response to the invitation. Isn't that incredible? And yet his ministry, not a failure at all, folks, because the way God measures success is not how we may sometimes do that, and looking at responses and growth and numbers and figuring all that, kind of whoa, and all that kind of stuff. What he's looking at was, did you do what I asked you to do? That's really God's question. Did you do what I asked you to do? Did you stand firm no matter what? Even though nobody ever responded, that's what he did. He stood firm. He continued to teach that word. So here he is, never a response in those 40 years of preaching, and he was predicting the fact that the Babylonians were coming. Not a popular message at all. In fact, as it drew near to the time when the Babylonians would overtake them, you may not know this, but Jeremiah shifted his message a little bit. He stopped saying to those people, repent so God will pull this back. Change your ways, change your ways. He began to say, hey, don't fight them. Just give in. It'll be less loss of life if you just capitulate and come on in. Well, then people called him a traitor and everything else under the sun. You can imagine it was really tough. That's Jeremiah's ministry. Jeremiah chapter 1 is the situation. It tells you the time period. It tells you what's going on. The Sitzim Leben, as some of the scholars call all of that. The situation, the time, the setting of the entire book. And it also contains something very, very important to Jewish people and to you and I as well. It contains the call of Jeremiah. Now, the reason that was important to them is because in their mind's eyes, the prophets spoke the very words of God. And I believe that as well, don't you? That's what those prophets did. They spoke the very words of God. So it was important for them to know and for the people to know that they had actually been called by God to do that. So what you have, Isaiah does his in Isaiah chapter 6. Other prophets do it at other times. Jeremiah does his right off the bat. At the time this happens, he's just a youngster. He's gone to church well, not church like you and I understand church. He went to the temple. He was a priest in a little old region called Benjamin from the town of Anathoth. Just a little old ordinary, typical young guy. And so verse 4, the word of the Lord came to me saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations. God's saying, you're the man. I'm calling you to do a particular job. And as he calls him, I want you to realize he's expressing to Jeremiah a sense of confidence. You can trust in this. I want to tell you, this is not some fly-by-night kind of deal. Before you were ever born, before you were even a glint in your daddy's eyes, I knew you. I had a job picked for you. You were a part of my eternal purpose. All right? The call of God. Now, I want you to know something. This may sound kind of removed, this call of prophets to what we do and how we live in 2013. But I want you to know something right now. When you answered the call to salvation through Jesus Christ, God called you to a ministry. God called you to go to work. In fact, the book of Ephesians and the book of 1 Corinthians outline it pretty carefully. He also gifted you in a particular way to fit in the overall kingdom body of believers. So you got a job. You've got a call. What you see in Ephesians and in 1 Corinthians is just an expression, an explanation of what happened to the prophets individually back in the Old Testament. But now we are all a kingdom of priesthood. We're a priesthood, right? And when you answer that invitation to be saved through Jesus, God was calling you into service. And he says what in the New Testament? He says, man, before the foundation of the world was ever laid, I had it in my mind, the death of my son, and all of these folks that would come to me. He knew all of that. Nothing new here. Take some confidence and take peace of mind in the fact you're not an accident. Something's going on here, something eternal and something important. And so God now equips Jeremiah. Anytime God calls, He's going to equip you. If God calls you to do something, He's going to give you the something to do it with, all right? So He says in verse 9, the Lord reached out His hand and touched my mouth, and He said to me, now I put my words in your mouth. When you speak, you're speaking for me. That's what He means by that, all right? See today, and here's the big picture. See today, I point you over nations and kingdoms to uproot and tear down, to destroy and overthrow, to build and to plant. Pretty heady job description, right, for a kid. Then he asks him the question twice. Look into the future, Jeremiah. What do you see? So he says in verse 11, the Lord came to me. What do you see, Jeremiah? That's our question today, right? What do you see? I see the branch of an almond tree, I replied. Big tootin' deal, right? Verse 12, the Lord said to me, you have seen correctly. So it was a big deal. For I am watching to see that my word is fulfilled. There's some imagery going on here. Let me just, not going to spend a lot of time with that. But let me tell you something about an almond tree that you may not know. That was the very first thing to bloom every spring. And by far, it was the first thing. Did all the gloom and the deadness of winter, when it looked like everything was going down, it's never going to change. We're in winter forever, here it goes. The almond tree would bloom. And God used that imagery to say, I want you to know what you're really looking at, Jeremiah. You're looking at me. Here, I'm going to tell you what. No matter what the world appears to be, I am in control. My word will be fulfilled. My will is going to be done, no matter how it seems. Now, is that a message just for Jeremiah? No. It's recorded for posterity, right? That's a message for all of us. I want to tell you, and this gives me confidence and it gives me hope. I don't care what's going on in this world. Whatever it is that's going on in this world, what's going on in my town, what's going on in my state, what's going on in Washington, D.C., what's going on in China, what's going on in Saudi Arabia, what's going on in Germany, wherever it might be, what's going on in South Africa, whatever it seems, God's will is going to be done. God's word will be fulfilled. You can count on that. You talk about something you can take to the bank. Take that to the bank. Know it for certain. If God calls you to this thing, God is going to see it through. You don't have to worry about whether or not you got the strength. God will see it through with you. Good, positive message as we stand right here on the brink of 2013, a brand new year. Who's in control of the brand new year? God Almighty. My God is in control. My God is going to see to it that His word is carried out, that His will is fulfilled. Then He asks him the question again. Things get a little dark at this point, kind of a specific answer specific to the situation back then. He says it again, verse 13, the word of the Lord came to me again. What do you see? Well, I see a boiling pot tilting away from the north. Now, just get a hold of the imagery here real quick. A boiling pot's full of what? Boiling stuff. And if it's tilting, it's about to spill, right? And if it spills, somebody's going to get burned. All right? It's not a good sign. It's tilting from the north, and here it's about to spill. God says, well, once again, you've seen correctly. And He begins to explain what's going to happen with the Babylonians. That they're going to come down and bring my judgment upon people, and people are going to get, it's punishment. It's a judgment that I'm bringing upon my people. Pretty specific. But He says something that really speaks to all the ages in verse 16. I will pronounce my judgments on my people because of their wickedness in forsaking me, in burning incense to other gods, and in worshiping what their hands have made. Now that may sound like, well, that's Old Testament stuff, and worshiping idols and all that kind of stuff. I want you to know, and I want you to understand, when you look at it, just kind of pull this passage out and let it speak to you. Just put it out there on your Teflon screen and just kind of look at it for just a second. You know what God's saying? He's saying, if you trust in anything before me, I'm not pleased with that. God takes that as a personal issue. He calls it wickedness. He calls it worshiping idols. He calls it forsaking Him. It may not feel that way, but He says, I don't want you trusting anything that you have. I don't want you to trust anything that you can do. None of your resources, none of your possessions, none of it. You let me be the one that calls the shots. You do what I want you to do. That's the important message. That's true for every single age. We're not here to trust in us. We're here to trust in Him. And God honors that. God honors that. So he says, look, once you've looked to the future, once you kind of sit back and look, you need to do 4 things. Verse 17 is probably not only the key verse in chapter 1, I think it may be the key verse in the whole book of Jeremiah. You read, if you haven't read Jeremiah in a while, or if you've never read it at all, sit down and take a peek at it. You'll wade through some stuff, but I don't want to tell you, there's some stuff that's just right now. Y'all, it's just right now. It is today's newspaper. It really is. And he says 4 things need to happen as you stand on the brink of this new future, this brave new world that I'm calling you to. There's 4 things that you got to take this home. Take this home, stick it in the bank. Here's what he says. 4 things, verse 17. Get ready. Stand up. Get off your behind. Stand up. Use your gift that I've gifted you with. And do not be afraid, whatever you see in the future. You know, listen, let me tell you something. That is so easy for me to stand up here and say. Because I know Gary's going to say amen. Right? And that feels good. It's so, my point is, it's so easy to talk about, y'all. It's so easy to talk about. Look at the future. What do you see in the future? What do you see? What do you see? Well, look here. If God's in charge of it, we know that's everything's okay on that end, right? So get ready. Stand up. Use your gift. The gift that he describes here in verse 17 is you speak my word to them. That was his gift, to be a prophet, right? Your gift and my gift, something else. All right? Use your gift and do not be afraid. He says, in fact, I want to tell you what, if you're afraid, I'm going to make you more afraid. If you live in fear, I'm going to make you more fearful. Have you ever seen that happen before? Folks get around and we start talking about what the future may hold, and somebody brings up this discouraging kind of note, and before you know it, the conversation, you just take the whole plan and you just shut it down. Fear breeds fear. He says, if you're going to be afraid, let me tell you what, I'm going to make you more afraid in front of these folks that you're afraid of. He says, don't be afraid. Get ready. Stand up. We're talking about church life. I'm talking about your personal life. I'm talking about your personal ministry. I'm talking about what you do in your business life. I'm talking about relationships. We're talking about all of that. Get ready, because God's in control. Here we stand on the brink of 2013. Whatever's in the past is in the past. Here we are. Get ready. Stand up, exercise your gift, and do not be afraid. He says, I'm going to reinforce you, verse 18. I'm going to make you a wall. I'm going to make you solid brass. And he says, it's going to be tough. Look at verse 19. It's going to be tough. They're going to fight you. Talking about his own people. They'll fight you, but they will not overcome you. Now, I want you to notice something about all of this. Sometimes people take this passage and they say, that's a message for America. That America's going down the tubes and we're moving away from God. And if we don't do something, God's going to bring his judgment. I'm not saying that any of that's all wrong, y'all, okay? All right? Does God have the nations in mind? Sure he does. He's got America in mind. He's got every country in mind. He's got every nation in mind. But I want you to notice from verse 16 on, who's he talking to? And who's he talking about? He's talking about my people, he says. What the real issue is not what's going on in culture. Culture is going to do whatever culture does. Do you agree with that? Whatever goes on out there, it's just going to happen. God's interest is, what will you do? What will my kingdom kids do? How do we live with that? How do we respond to that? He says, I want you to get ready. I want you to stand up. I want you to exercise your gift. And I don't want you, above all else, I don't want you to be afraid of what's coming down the pike. I'm in charge. My will be done. In your personal life, it will happen in the congregational life of this church. Don't you be afraid. Man, with that kind of backbone being poured down our spines, it's just kind of hard to imagine that anybody would falter, but we do, don't we? And let me tell you the one thing, let me talk to you about the Achilles heel in all of this. The Achilles heel is you and me. In fact, I can simplify it into one word. Just make an excuse. And everything goes off into the ointment. Not God's will. God's will is going to be done. But if you're going to be a part of it, if you're going to reach your potential, if I'm going to reach my potential, then I don't stand back here and offer up excuses. That's exactly what Jeremiah tried to do. Go back to verse 6. He says, he hadn't heard all the details yet. He just hears God's calling him to be a prophet. He says, sovereign Lord. Sovereign Lord. You're calling me to be a prophet, but I don't know how to speak. And on top of all of that, I'm just a kid. And you know what? Both those things were true. He probably didn't know how to speak, and he was just a kid. I want you to look at God's response in verse 7. God said to him, don't you ever say that to me again. Don't you say that to me. There's kind of some irony here if you look at verse 6. He addresses him as sovereign Lord. Who is sovereign Lord? That's the one that nobody stops him. Nobody questions him. Nobody says, hey, you can't go there. He is sovereign Lord. Ah, sovereign Lord. You're right about everything else, but not me. That's the sorriest, lamest excuse. It really, really is. You know what? When we say, I'm too young, or I'm too old, or I'm too busy, or whatever it is, you know what it is? You're just chicken. You're just being chicken. If God is sovereign God, and the future is in His hands, He says, you will not be overcome. What do God's people do? We arise to the occasion. Fear grips us sometimes. We describe it as other things. We describe that fear as being too busy or not qualified or too what this or too that, just like Jeremiah did. But the deal is afraid. Let me tell you, y'all know what happened in 1973? A young director by the name of Steven Spielberg. You ever heard of him? He was 26 back in 1973. And they asked him to do a movie based on Peter Benchley's book about sharks that attack the eastern seaboard. A shark. You ever heard of that movie? Do-do, 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 do-do. What was the name of that movie? Jaws. How many of you have seen Jaws? Yeah. Biggest mistake I ever made in my marriage life was taking my young wife to go see Jaws. Scared her to death. Now, she'll deny it. She's sitting right back here. She'll deny this, but I remember well. After we saw that movie, it was several weeks before she would even sit in the bathtub while the water ran in because she was afraid something was going to come down through the pipe. And she couldn't get, she knew it wasn't a shark, but it could be something. You know what I mean? Now she will say, no, listen, I'm a preacher. I always have to tell the truth. I'm telling you the truth. That's exactly what she did. Well, listen, I found something. And so she's got this kind of this afraid something kind of going on here. Well, I read something 4 months ago, August of 2012. It was an article that said millions of Americans are terrified of sharks because of that movie. That's something. No rational reason, but they're terrified because of that movie. In fact, if they hear that a shark might be in their area, they're staying away from the beach. Y'all, let me ask you, are there ever sharks at the beach in Galveston? Every cotton-picking day. They live down there. Of course they are. But do you know how many people die from shark bites in America every year? I'm giving you a fact. You know how many people die from shark bite? Less than 1.92 people die. I don't know what the rest of him does, how that goes on, but 0.92 people die every year from shark bite. It's a statistical kind of thing, right? So less than one person dies every year from shark bite. There's really, more people die on a trampoline than die from shark bites. 1.1 people die every year from jumping on a trampoline. Or more people die from freestanding kitchen ranges tipping over. How does that work? Freestanding kitchen ranges tipping over kill 1.15 people every year. Every year. In fact, television sets, big heavy furniture, terrorist furniture kills 26.44 people every single year. My point in all that is fear is irrational. And you let fear take hold, let me tell you what, God says that you let fear take hold, then I'll terrify you in front of them, right? It begins to rule. They're irrational. It's not foundational. Here's the solid truth that we live on. It's a scary world. Is it a scary world? It's a scary world. But here's the biblical truth that we live on. God says, my word, I am watching to see that my word prevails. I am watching to see that my will is done. I will be faithful. I will carry it out. You will not be overwhelmed. Let's go. What do you see in the future? That's the question. Don't sit around feeling inadequate. Don't sit around feeling like you're not up to the task. Don't do that. We're all ordinary. And God bless the glory of the ordinary. I'm glad we're all ordinary. God bless that. He was just a kid from Anathoth. You never even heard of that place, have you? And God made him someone who was a prophet to the nations. Of course we're ordinary. You think you're too small to make a difference? You think size has anything to do with the kind of difference you can make? Then I want you to spend the night in a closed room with a mosquito. Little things can make a big difference. Let me tell you about this guy, Derek Broadus. Right now, he's a sophomore at the University of Tennessee, right now as we speak. He's a sophomore attending school there. Last year, he was a freshman. And on November the 6th, 2011, he's sitting on a couch eating potato chips, waiting for the volunteer game to start. Tennessee Vols. Okay, y'all know what I'm talking about? Tennessee Volunteers? He's waiting for the game to start. It's about less than an hour until the game. He's just sitting there eating his chips, waiting for the game to start when he gets a phone call. And the voice on the other end of the line says, Coach Dooley, that's the coach of the Tennessee Volunteers, is sending a police escort to your house to pick you up to get you to the stadium for the game that starts at 7 o'clock. He says, hangs it up, and about the time he hangs it up, guess who arrives at his front door? A police escort. And they take him to the stadium, and while he's suiting up, somebody's helping him suit up, the trainer's loosening him up, they put a jersey on him, doesn't even have his name on it. His name is not even on the thing. He's one. How in the world did that happen? Well, let me tell you what happened. On the Thursday before, the number one kicker, first string kicker, injured himself, so he was out. During the pregame warm-ups, less than an hour before the game was to start, the second string kicker pulled a muscle, and Derek had tried out for the team as he came in as a freshman. Didn't even make it. Listen, y'all, he was a reject. A reject. You can't get more ordinary than a reject. And the coach calls him in. All of a sudden, he's a Tennessee Volunteer. Soon into the game, he kicks his first extra point. Soon in the game, he kicks his second extra point. Into the game, he kicks his third extra point. And before the end of the first half, he kicks a 21-yard field goal. Here's a picture of him doing actually that, kicking that 21-yard field goal. Guess who's a member of the Tennessee Volunteers right now today? A reject who answered a call. That night, Coach Dooley gave him the game ball. Look at this picture. He took a picture of it for posterity. Him and some of his friends gave him the game ball. Listen, if that can happen in football, what do you think can happen in the hands of an almighty, sovereign Lord? What can happen in the hands of Jehovah God? And listen, I'm not calling for something other than ordinary lives. I want to say it again. God bless the ordinary. There's glory in the ordinary. He's a God of a towel, isn't he? He's the God of a towel as he wiped disciples' feet. Ordinary is beautiful, but never, ever, ever use that as an excuse. God is calling us to a glorious, glorious future. Let me tell you something I've decided, and I'm telling you this is just me, but this really struck me about 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago, somewhere in there. Maybe I've not really ventured far enough from shore in my little boat. Maybe as a church, we've not ventured far enough out. And I think that's probably true. I'm pretty sure that's true. Maybe what we need to do in 2016, especially in light of all that God has done in 2012. Look at all that. What's that? 2013. What did I say? Okay, well, 2016 too. But 2013 first. Thanks, brother. I appreciate that. 2013. I don't know where I got 2016. I'm just thinking way ahead. That's it. I'm always ahead, y'all. I'm always ahead. What did God do in 2012? Man, he blessed us incredibly. I mean, it's just amazing what God has done. And the things that we would be afraid of, the things that we'd sit back and wring our hands over, God just said, just blew it away and did incredible stuff. And it got me to thinking, we're not venturing far enough from shore. How about if we took a wider arc in this, not only as a church, but in your own personal life? Get off your behind. Venture out there. What if we got far enough away that where the storms were so bold that we had to trust in his mastery? What if we got far enough away from the land that we couldn't see land anymore and we had to be guided by the stars, or better yet, the star? What would our worship look like if that's where we lived? What would our lives together look like if that's where we lived? Folks, look into the future. What do you see? Look around. Look around this room. What do you see? I've seen some people here that I've known for 27 years. The majority of you I haven't. You've come since then, all right? But some of you I've seen for a long time. We're people. We're ordinary people. Are we ordinary? Oh, you're so painfully ordinary. So am I. We're ordinary. But you know what I see? I see lions. We're disciples of the Lion of Judah. And we are lions. That's exactly what we are. And you know what you call a gang of lions? You know what you call a gang of lions? It's not called a herd of lions. It's not called a flock of lions. You know what it's called? A pride. 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 Who are we? We're children of the Lion of Judah. Not because of us, but because of Him and who He is. Do you know what lions do? You know what a pride of lions do? They eat together. They hunt together. They kill together. They do what God designed them to do. Let me tell you something else that lions do. They roar. That's what they do by God's design. When's the last time we just roared as disciples of the Lion of Judah? What do you see? What do you see? If we can serve you in any way, let us know about it as we stand and sing.
Just as I am without one plea, but that thy blood was shed for me, and that thou bidst me come to thee, O Lamb of God, I come, just as I am, and waiting not to bid my soul of one dark lot to thee, whose blood can cleanse each spot.